WNST NFL draft in the books in Philadelphia. 100,000 people gathered on a beautiful evening in front of the steps with Rocky. Apollo Creed was there, and Luke Jones was in Owings Mills eating cheese balls and awaiting pick number 16 on the clock. Luke, I think we'll be talking about this for hours, when it's all over with. But the first round alone, whether it's NFL Network or ESPN or, any of the mock drafts, any of the pundits, any of the people we've talked to, plenty of people felt like they were in the know in a lot of ways. And I think we get a nice little round view of the draft with Myles Garrett and everything that was going to come after that. But boy, this was one of those ones that it's like a lotto ticket. No one had these numbers. I mean, it was really run on wide receivers and quarterbacks before the Ravens got there. I don't think anybody had that predicted, dude.
Yeah, and how about the fact that all we talked about over the better part of the last 3 or 4 months was how defensive-driven this draft was. And that's not to say that the talent in this draft still isn't more geared toward the defensive side of the football, but it certainly didn't play out that way over the first 12 picks. I mean, you mentioned it. All 3 wide receivers that we talked about at length, all gone in the first 9 picks, amazingly. The quarterbacks, which, based on value, based on prospect rankings, based on what all the draft pundits really said, they wondered if there were really 1 or even 2 guys that were truly worthy of a first-round pick. Well, we knew guys would go in the first round because quarterbacks are always, there's always reaches. There are always guys that are overdrafted. I mean, that's just the way it works. But lo and behold, 3 quarterbacks go in the first 12 picks. And, you end up getting a draft that had some really talented players considered to be in the top 5, top 10 conversation that ended up falling. From Jonathan Allen to Reuben Foster, O.J. Howard, not a defensive player, but certainly a guy who was projected to be a top 10 pick.
Charles Harris?
All of those guys, yeah, I mean, all of those guys ended up falling and falling pretty significantly. So crazy. There's no doubt about that. I mean, the craziness began with Chicago giving up a king's ransom to move up 1 spot to take Mitchell Trubisky. So, I mean, that was pretty lucrative. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And to me, give the 49ers a heck of a lot of credit there. They moved back a spot. They picked up 3 additional picks. And
that John Lynch, he went to a good school, huh? He's smart.
Yeah, they still drafted Solomon Thomas. So, it was definitely an interesting first round. But you know what? We talked about this week. We've talked about this for a long time now. With there being such little consensus on, other than Myles Garrett going number 1. And, we talked about this the other day. I wasn't buying that Cleveland wasn't going to take him, despite the discussion of whether they might take Trubisky. I thought he was very clearly the top player on the board. But after that, there was quite a bit of volatility. There was quite a bit of difference of opinion. And that's not to say there weren't talented players, but how they should be ranked, you really did not get a good consensus. And you saw mock drafts that were all over the place. And sure enough, it played out that way because there were plenty of surprises over the course of Thursday night.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter. All of his views on all the draft picks will be coming in the coming days. And if you're on the WNST text service, much like at 10:08 on Thursday night, you get it first. It's all brought to you by our friends at Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And don't forget, our trips are on sale now. London, Nashville, Green Bay, Minnesota. We're offering $100 off for this week. You can certainly toss us a note over the weekend, nasty at WNST.net. We're taking deposits on the trips as well. Toss me a note. We'd love to get you on. Let's just go through some of the elements, right, that set up Marlon Humphrey before we get to Marlon Humphrey, because we're going to be talking about Marlon Humphrey in the same way we're talking about Brashad Perryman, and the same way we're still talking about Kamalea Correa and Ronnie Stanley and CJ. There's going to be plenty of body of work here to evaluate Marlon Humphrey as a player. I want to go into what got him here, and really the strangest thing that happened when the Corey Davis thing happened at 5. I had to really start thinking about this, right? And then Williams comes off at 7. Both the running backs are gone. Ross goes to the Bengals at 9 when everyone had them taking a defensive player from what I could tell. Then the Mahomes thing. I mean, as this thing started to set up, by the time the clock got to 12, we were saying there's going to be 3 Alabama guys that were all thought to be off the board that one of Oz is going to have a shot at an Alabama player. And I know we all make fun of that and get worked up around here, but that's the team he would have the best look on and the best scouting on. And certainly I have no complaints with C.J. Mosley, but we could go back to Ralph Staten and make a stink if we wanted to. Malik Hooker, Barnett, Reddick, all of those guys were sitting there after 12. And, we'll never know, right, whether the Ravens would have taken Hooker. I think they might have been pressed to do that, being that everybody had him in the top 5, top 7. Barnett would have been a guy getting after the quarterback. I think they would have been fine with that. I don't know what their board really would have had there. I know they liked Reddick as well, right? But one thing, everybody behind them, they like Marlon Humphrey the best, right? There is no argument about Humphrey versus Gary and Conley, who we can get into, or Jonathan Allen or O.J. Howard. Humphrey was a guy that was a need player, Luke, and for me, and I wrote about this in the hot take moments, after the draft that we sort of live in at that point when I called a Bryant Des White, which I still think is kind of funny. I watched the games last year. I was up at the Meadowlands 2 weeks in a row where their secondary got them beat. I had the long flight back from Dallas that got me home at 2 o'clock in the morning through Houston after we got our ass kicked out there by Des Bryant. I was in New England that night. The Pittsburgh game and the reach and all of that stuff. Dude, you've been writing about the secondary for years. Google Luke Jones's work before the 2014 and 15 seasons, and you and I took the long ride out of Foxborough 2 years ago after blowing a 2-touchdown lead because the secondary wasn't good enough, and Jimmy Smith hasn't been on the field, and Jimmy Smith wasn't on the field. And, dude, in December, like when the games were going on, all you and I could talk about was the secondary, the corner, the other team having someone special, and the Ravens not having someone special. And you know what? You and I got paralyzed by this. It started the corner, then it was the rush end, and then Dumerville's not going to be here, and Suggs is aging, and we don't know where we are with Zadarius Smith, and we don't know where we are with Matt Judon. And then it was, Mel Kiper's mocking a wide receiver, and Mike Mayock's mocking a wide, Mike Williams, and, we all got sniffed off of the wide receiver thing, and we'll never know because those guys all came off the board. But, dude, I cannot in any way bitch about them taking a cornerback. Now, you can talk about Adoree Jackson. You can talk about Gary and Conley, who I cannot imagine that they would have taken. But, Adam Schefter reported live on the air 20 minutes after Conley got picked that the Ravens gave him a polygraph test earlier in the week. Clearly, he was a guy they were looking at. And on a skill level, he was a guy everybody in the league was looking at until Tuesday morning, I think, right?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to completely disagree with you because clearly, it was obvious that you can take another cornerback. I will disagree in saying that, this wasn't their biggest need at this point.
Oh, wow, okay, all right. Well, yeah, but in December, that's what we were yelling about, though, right?
Well, and the offense and the lack of pass rusher.
Fair enough, and the running game.
They have a lot of needs.
Yeah, okay.
Don't get me wrong. Look, I'm not the guy that's going to sit here and say that this was a bad pick. I mean, Marlon Humphrey could go on to be the best cornerback in franchise history. I mean, we don't know. But
he has the pedigree to be that, right? I mean, you're not overstating that.
Well,
everybody today wakes up thinking, the Colts think Malik Hooker's going to be, better than Bob Sanders. O.J. Howard's going to the Buccaneers with this great quarterback. I mean, there's going to be 3 or 4 guys in this round that are going to be, not Ray Lewis, but they're going to be in the Hall of Pro Bowl, 3 years from now. And it's for us to figure out who the Khalil Macks and the Derek Carrs and the Des Bryant, who these guys are, right?
Yeah, and I guess, my point being, when you look at some of the other guys that were available, and you just mentioned some of the names, Jonathan Allen fell, Reuben Foster fell, O.J. Howard, and I know tight end isn't exactly a need. We've talked about it a lot, though, and I've said this a lot. There's a lot of inventory. I don't know if there's a playmaker in that group, and O.J. Howard could be that. There are a lot of people that think that. But you go down the list, Forrest Lamp, there were some other pass rushers that would have been available there. Tack McKinley, trading back. I mean, there were lots of different options there. Look, Marlon Humphrey was a consensus first round pick. There was a lot of volatility as far as where he would go. Some people said somewhere in the neighborhood 11 or 12. I think it was Pete Prisco had him picked at the end of the first round. It's not to say he's a bad player. I think there's plenty of things there that you like about him. 6'2", 200 pounds, physical, an outside corner very clearly.
Won a lot of games, right? Yeah, played on a good team.
Sure. Played in some big games, but on the flip side, and I saw Sports Illustrated wasn't all that hot and bothered about the Ravens taking him there, and talked about his technique being a little rough. Talked about the fact that he struggled on deep balls in coverage. So there's even some draft evaluators who suggest he might be best suited to play safety in the long run. I don't know about all that. What I do know is I'm not positive he's going to start for the Ravens this year. And that was something that 5 years ago wouldn't have sounded like a big deal. I mean, Jimmy Smith didn't start as a rookie when the Ravens drafted him in 2011. But when you look at the other needs that the Ravens have, pass rusher, inside linebacker, wide receiver, which we talked about, they didn't get a chance to draft one of those guys. I'm not going to blame them for that by any means. But they have a lot of boxes they have to check off. And if you tell me that Jimmy Smith's going to miss 6 games again this year, then okay. But at the same time, I'm not convinced that Marlon Humphrey's ready to come in and be a day one starter and play at that high of a level. Their depth is certainly good in the secondary. There's no doubt about that. They've made that from day one a huge priority by adding Tony Jefferson, adding Brandon Carr, re-signing Ladarius Webb. Now they have Humphrey in the mix. Their secondary, there's no excuse for this secondary not to be one of the best 4 or 5 in the NFL this year, even if they have an injury or two. That's how much depth they have. But that said, there were some other players available at 16 there that the Ravens could have taken, and they decided to go with a position that was still a need. It wasn't their most pressing need, though. They could have lined up with Jimmy Smith, Brandon Carr, and Tavon Young as their top 3, and I think you would have felt pretty darn good about that.
Well,
now,
I think the question is, we want to line up the next 3 years with O.J. Howard or Marlon Humphrey or Jonathan Allen, those were the choices. And about trading back, they couldn't have done that because no one was coming. You know what I mean? Once the quarterbacks were gone.
Ozzie Newsome said that they did get some calls about trading back. Now, they didn't get the value that they wanted to justify doing it, but he did confirm that they got some calls about moving back. Now, what teams are moving up, what they were looking to get, who knows? And you're right, because they weren't quarterbacks, it was far more it was very unlikely that anyone was going to overpay.
But there were some guys, though, like Harris, McKinley, Foster, if you like the medicals on him. Howard, obviously Howard being there at 16. There were a lot of teams. Jonathan Allen was still there. There might have been a lot of teams further back that never thought that they would have a chance to draft O.J. Howard that probably did get on the, throwing something together kind of quickly at that point because a different player was there than they ever believe would be there. I don't think Ozzie Newsome really thought Marlon Humphrey would be there, right?
Well, see, I don't know about that. Maybe. I didn't see Marlon Humphrey being a consensus top 10 pick when you look at mock drafts. That's all I'm saying. Look, I'm not saying they reached for him. He was a rock solid first round pick. It was just a matter of where he went. Again, I just don't know if they got better value with him than if they had taken Reuben Foster, if they had taken O.J. Howard, if they had taken Jonathan Allen. And that's all. I think that's a fair question to ask.
Fair enough.
They do have some other needs. And that's, it was a little curious to me. That's what I'll say. It's insane to say something's a bad pick. No one knows that. For all we know, as much as everyone, including me, making fun of the Chicago Bears on Thursday night, Mitch Trubisky could end up being the next Joe Montana for all we know. I'm guessing not, but, we don't really know.
Could be the next Jay Cutler.
Right. But based on the information that we have at this point, and look, I'm not a talented evaluator. I'm not a GM, so I'm not going to say the Ravens were absolutely wrong, but I do think it's a little curious, given the many needs that they had, that they went with something that was, they wanted to add a corner, but all we heard about was what? How deep this draft was for cornerbacks. Could they have taken a corner in the second or third round and still had really, nice depth to back up what they already have? Yeah, you could have done that, and then maybe taken one of those other guys and helped your football team more in the present, I suppose. And look, Brandon Carr, maybe he's completely washed up. Maybe Jimmy Smith gets hurt in week 4 and misses 10 games. And, based on history, there's probably a reasonable chance of that happening, unfortunately. But if those guys do stay healthy, this first-round pick isn't going to really move the meter that terribly much for the Ravens, unless he comes in and he's way better than everyone thinks he can be as a rookie. It's got to clean up the technique based on what you see, but certainly the talent level is there. Let's also keep in mind, this is a really young player. This is a guy who's a redshirt sophomore, not going to be 20 years old until July, or 21 years old until July. So this is one of the youngest players the Ravens have ever drafted. So I think that's something to take into account as well.
Ozzie also has a lot of pedigree on him with his father and playing at Alabama.
Sure.
And, Ozzie's known this kid since he was born, like literally, right?
Well, yeah, and Ozzie, you do trust that he has better intel on him than other ones. But, at the same time, Terrence Cody wasn't exactly a good pick. Courtney Upshaw was a solid pick, but wasn't a special player. So, we'll see how it plays out. Again, there are lots of things to like about Marlon Humphrey. There's some other things to be a little bit more concerned about, just from his play on the field, including coverage of the deep ball, and that's something that a lot of young guys have issues with that. So that's not atypical. But, again, based on some of the other players that were available for the Ravens at 16, I think it's fair to at least ask, would they have been better served to take one of those other names that we mentioned? We'll see how it plays out. It could be that O.J. Howard is the next Eric Ebron and really isn't much of a playmaker at the tight end position. Or maybe he becomes one of the best tight ends in the league, and maybe the Ravens whiff there on a chance to get Joe Flacco, a special playmaker. Or we'll see about Jonathan Allen. We'll see about Reuben Foster. I mean, there's some other.
We'll be measuring these guys, right? I mean, that's part of the fun of this thing, that the Ravens passed on who to draft who. I mean, and that game plays out over the next 3 years. All right, so moving forward, okay, the draft is quote unquote stacked on defense, right? Pass rushers, secondary. We've heard all that, linebackers, the whole deal. Now the question becomes, can they get a wide receiver in the second round? Can they get a right tackle? Will they find a pass rusher? Are they going to draft a lot? All these other needs that you have, here we go, right? I mean, into Friday, into Saturday, plenty of picks, plenty of movement around. They dealt away Timmy Jernigan, who clearly they didn't want on their football team anymore, to move up around, and we'll see what that nets them. But this is where it does get interesting for them, because first-round picks, I mean, there's been a couple of Hall of Famers Ozzie's drafted, including 2 right out of the gate 21 years ago. But this has really been about where the Brandon Williamses are, right? And where the Dallas Thomases are, and where that value is, and can they find some Bart Scott kind of thing, and do they find some Edwin Mulitalos and some Mike Flynn's and some players, just some good football players, some Jarrett Johnsons, some guys that are going to get on the field and come play football for the next 5-7 years around here.
Yeah, and I will say this. Now, I'll give the Ravens the benefit of the doubt on Marlon Humphrey. If they truly think he was better than some of those other names that fell into the middle of the first round, then fine. We'll see how it plays out. The proof will be in the pudding. I will say this, though. Because they did go for a guy that's a little more depth-oriented in the short term, in the first round, they got to find a couple starters here. I mean, as much, I know this is Baltimore. I know it's the Ravens. I know everyone defense. At some point, you got to start doing some stuff with your offense. I mean, you can't tell me that just Greg Roman is just going to wave a magic wand and they're suddenly going to have a really good offense. I like the fact that they added him, but they've lost 2 starters on the offensive line. They've lost Steve Smith and Kamar Aiken. We talked about that. There's a lot of work to be done on that side of the ball. And, we talked about pass rusher. In the second and third round, they need to find a couple guys that are going to be ready to play soon. They can't afford to have another draft where it's Kamale Correa and Bronson Kaluthi. And look, hopefully those guys are ready to play this year, and certainly that will help. That helps the whole process of a little less reliance on the rookies that they draft this year. They need some of their rookies from the last two drafts to step forward. That would certainly help, and that's always something that's a given. But because you did take a little bit more of a depth-oriented player in the first round, and time will tell if Marlon Humphrey's able to beat out Brandon Carr from day one, and if he is, great. But second and third round, these can't be developmental guys that are standing on the sideline. If that's the case, I don't like the Ravens' chances of being markedly better than they were a year ago. That's how I feel. So they need to find a couple guys that are ready to play. The good news, some players that we've talked about, Cam Robinson, Forrest Lamp, still there entering day two. Now, will be interesting to see how long they last. Clearly there wasn't a whole lot of action as far as offensive line. We saw Ramsick go at the end of the first round. That was basically it. A wide receiver, Juju Smith-Schuster from USC, certainly a guy who, productive college player, someone who could fit the mold of a possession kind of receiver, which is what the Ravens are looking at. Is he there when the Ravens are picking middle of the second round? Zay Jones, another wide receiver. Cup. There are some guys. Pass rush. Tyus Bowser, Jordan Willis. So there are some players there, but it's a matter of how quickly will those players go off the board here over the first 13, 14 picks of the first round or second round. So, whoever it might be. Like I said, because the Ravens, took Marlon Humphrey, who right now doesn't project to be a starter, he's got to beat out Brandon Carr. That's kind of the way it should be going into training camp, and we'll see how that plays out. And certainly, I would expect it to be a good competition there. So, if you're not going to have your first round pick automatically starting from day one, you better have your second and third round picks ready to play and play meaningful roles. If not, it's really difficult to look at this team and say that they're a lot better than what they were last year, 8-8, and kind of just on the outside looking in for the playoffs. So, those players there are players out there to be had. There are Pro Bowlers. We know this. We look at the history of the draft every year as time goes on. There are multiple Pro Bowlers that are still available, second, third round, and even into the early portion of day three. Ravens got to make sure they find a couple, and you would think, as much as I know they talk about best player available, but you would think they got to find some guys that meet some very clear, defined needs that they have at this point in time.
Really curious picks, though, right? Like team by team, in every city in the league, obviously all over NFL Network and Twitter and Facebook, and for people that play fantasy, or for draftniks who follow all the nerddom out there that goes on. Garrett Miles to the Browns, okay. Bears trading up, going balls in on a quarterback. I mean, okay. 49ers get a boatload of picks and take the kid that everybody said they were going to take. Okay. Jaguars take a running back. That everybody sort of figured that out. Boy, the Titans on a wide receiver where I don't know that most people had Corey Davis above Mike Williams. That's one to watch, and they have a quarterback to throw him the ball. The Jets get this big-time safety that was widely regarded to be, a blue-chip guy. Meanwhile, the Chargers pick up a wide receiver in Mike Williams. That's an interesting thing, I think, for Phillip Rivers, and I don't think that was a reach at all. I think that's a nice pick for them. Panthers were widely speculated to take McCaffrey, and they did. And then the Bengals go in on John Ross, but I still think of all the picks that happened in the first round, the weirdest thing to me was the Chiefs trade up for Mahomes. I mean, for me, even ballsier than the Bears, and giving away to go get the best quarterback in this draft when they didn't really have one. And you can say what you want about Mike Glennon and what backup quarterbacks cost to get starter money at the, Osweiler, Tyrod, all these kind of guys that are fringe guys. I found that one to be the strangest one. And then the Texans then have to go all in, right? Somebody has to go get Deshaun Watson because he's clearly where that ledge is for a lot of these teams. And they go and, give away the ranch to move up for the second year in a row to trying to find, a quarterback while their defense is still good enough. Man, there are a lot of moving parts in the league, though, right? I mean, I think a lot of other places where people can either be more upset, more outraged, or more intrigued by day one, because, I mean, the Eagles got a pass rush. They got great value. I mean, I think the Colts got incredible value, and I think the Ravens fell into that range where value fell to them because of the wide receivers and the quarterbacks. But if two of these quarterbacks go on to become, I mean, Patrick Mahomes 4 years from now is a Pro Bowl caliber quarterback, we won't laugh at the Chiefs. But right now, after 3-4 months of speculation on these quarterbacks, I don't know that I can feel real good as a Bears, a Chiefs, or a Texans fan, right?
Well, I like the Texans getting Deshaun Watson. I mean, certainly you can ask the question about the Chiefs, but what's the other thing we've said, Nestor? What have we said about the Chiefs the last few years?
Their quarterback isn't good enough.
They're not winning the Super Bowl with Alex Smith. I mean, they're just not. So I think that's them recognizing that, and they still have a roster that, and I would assume Alex Smith's still going to be their starting quarterback this year, as awkward as it might be, as disenchanted as he might be. I'm guessing he's still their starter, barring something really strange happening. But I at least like a team recognizing that this guy's not going to get us over the hump. And they made a very bold move, and certainly you can talk about the fact that, that it hurts them in the short term. There's been a team that's been really good, but at the same time, were they going to acquire anything else that was going to make them so good where they get over the hump? I'm not so sure. I think Deshaun Watson's a great fit in Houston. I mean, you said it. That defense is really good. They've got a solid running game. They've got a really good wide receiver. That is for a, and Deshaun Watson, I mean, regardless of the fact that he ended up being the third quarterback taken, he was clearly a high-profile guy playing in a program like Clemson and having a career like he had. This is about as good of a situation as you can come into, and he's going to have, to me, he's going to have every opportunity to win a starting job. It's not like he's exactly facing us, stout competition there. So I think that one's interesting. I think you mentioned it, the Colts getting Malik Hooker, a guy that Chuck Pagano probably sees traits similar to Ed Reed. That's what you've heard a lot of people say about Hooker. So it's definitely was interesting to see how it played out. And as I mentioned it, I mentioned it to you that Ozzie Newsome confirmed that he was getting calls of teams wanting to move into the 16th spot. He also confirmed that the Ravens were attempting to trade up. And he said only into the earlier teens. So who was that? Was it Hassan Reddick, who they really liked from Temple? Was it Barnett? Was it Hooker? The fact that they took Marlon Humphrey tells me that they wouldn't have been opposed to if they think Hooker is going to be a Pro Bowl safety and is a special transcendent talent. Even with the depth they have at safety, I wouldn't have been surprised to see that then. So I think it's one of those three players based on how it looks. Unless maybe they did like Marshawn Lattimore, the cornerback from Ohio State who went to the Saints. So it's just kind of interesting to see how it all played out. But I really don't think anyone should be that shocked about the quarterback. Were they reaches? Yeah, certainly Trubisky, certainly Mahomes, based on how most people thought. Watson, you can make an argument there that he could have gone somewhere in the middle of the first round. He goes 12th. So that one's not a shock. But
we all urinate on the quarterbacks for 4 months, and then the bell rings and Rodgers shows up and they all boo him, and it's like moths to light, right? You can count on it. The top 3 or 4 quarterbacks, no matter how good or bad they're perceived to be, they're going to be gone. I mean, and I don't even know to question that anymore. I am way more shocked by the wide receivers, though. I mean, especially when you're talking about boom or bust. 3 quarterbacks, 3 wide receivers. What are the odds on that in the first round, in the first 12 picks? What are the odds of 4 of them being really good players out of the 6? I don't think it's very good based on history at those positions and also based on where they went. I mean, I think Corey Davison has a chance because he's got a quarterback. I mean, maybe you could say the same thing for Ross and Williams. They have quarterbacks in San Diego and Cincinnati, but by and large, 3 wide receivers that early, 3 quarterbacks that early. I mean, the odds aren't even good when it's like Leaf and Manning, and Leaf's a punchline now, but, at the time it wasn't like that.
Yeah, and you just said it. I mean, 4 out of 6, I'd even say the chances probably aren't great to 3 out of 6. I mean, it's just, it's what we know about the position, and, we can define that. I mean, out of those 6, do 1 or 2 of them become Pro Bowl caliber? Maybe. Do 3 or 4, become either Pro Bowl caliber or at least quality starter? Maybe. Do all 6 of them? I'll say absolutely not, just because based on history. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how it plays out. I mean, I was a Corey Davis guy, but I was definitely surprised to see him go as early as he did. But, you just mentioned it. That's a team to watch out for in the AFC, and I'm not saying that they're going to be a favorite or that they're a serious Super Bowl contender yet, but that's a team, the Titans, they quietly played some pretty good football, especially as the year went on last year.
If you give me a penny right now, I bet on them in that division. You know what I mean? We're going to see every team in that division. That's not a good trip down. I mean, it's a great trip to Nashville. Don't get me wrong. Sure. We're selling trips. Sure. But as far as going down there thinking you're just going to steal a game, I mean, this isn't 5 years ago anymore, right?
Yeah. I don't know if Marcus Mariota is going to become an all-pro quarterback, but I do think he's a guy that can become a really good quarterback. So it'll be interesting. I mean, that's definitely, to me, one of the more interesting picks. And you mentioned this before. I love the Christian McCaffrey to Carolina pick. I really do. I think that he's going to give that offense a dimension that it's kind of been lacking. He is such a dynamic player. I mean, he's a guy that, as much as running back's not really wasn't a pressing need for the Ravens. If he had somehow fallen to the middle of the first round, I wouldn't have criticized the Ravens for taking him, because I think he can be that kind of a dynamic guy. They signed Danny Woodhead, and I think Christian McCaffrey can be Danny Woodhead on steroids, meaning, not anything nefarious, meaning he can just be that kind of a player, but a Pro Bowl, all-pro kind of version of that guy who, will run the football effectively, can be a return man, can be an outstanding receiver, and can be, a game changer, a difference maker for you. So I thought that was a nice pick for Cam Newton with that Panthers offense. So, other one I'll throw out there, because I was talking about it, O.J. Howard. Tampa Bay takes him, gives their young quarterback another playmaker. I think the Buccaneers have to be thrilled that O.J. Howard was sitting there at 19.
Yeah, they're winning the draft right now, right? I mean, literally, with the 19th pick, they got a tight end that almost everyone had, getting nowhere near 12 or 14, quite frankly, right?
Yeah, I mean, you look at them, you look at San Francisco. I mean, San Francisco ends up getting Reuben Foster 31st. I mean, there were some people that thought Reuben Foster could have gone in the top 4.
He had a medical issue that popped up, and that was he also had the P test. Yes.
Yeah, the diluted sample, and he had the issue at the combine where they sent him home. I mean, there's clearly some red flags there, but when you talk about getting to the end of the first round, when you talk about what kind of talent he is, I mean, he's a guy that's been, the comp for him has been Patrick Willis. I mean, he can be that. I mean, that's talking about a fringe Hall of Fame player right there. So
I just hope the comp for him isn't the other Alabama linebacker.
Yeah, right. So Rolando McClain. One-time Raven, but not really.
We spent a year and a half talking about Rolando McClain saving our defense here.
Yeah,
and he saved Dallas for about a week or two.
Yeah, he did. Well, he had a good season for them, and he's kind of right back where he was. And we didn't mention it, and as much as we make fun of them, the Browns didn't get a quarterback, but they continue to find some pieces. And they didn't mess up taking Myles Garrett. I think that was the right pick to make there. They end up getting Jabril Peppers, which I'm still not convinced he has a defined position in the NFL, and that's a scary kind of thing. Unless you're really creative, unless it's that special of an athlete, I'm still a little skeptical about him. But there are a lot of people that really liked him.
I'm tweeting right now, the Cleveland Browns stocking up on draft picks since 1999.
Yeah. But and then they take David Njoku, the tight end from Miami, as they traded back into the first round. So, I mean, maybe the Browns are going to hold off another year on a quarterback, and maybe it's just a case where they say, you know what, we could take one of these quarterbacks that we really don't love, and best case scenario, we're going to go 3-13, or we can continue to stack, build some talent around that quarterback, whoever it's going to be. And we saw them spend a ton of money on their offensive line in free agency, and they add some more talent on both sides of the ball. And maybe they're going to wait till next year. Maybe they like next year's quarterback class better. I don't know. I mean, I will at least credit them for doing something differently from the other also-rans that we're seeing in the NFL. As much as we've kind of poked fun at the Moneyball thing with Paul DePodesta and seeing what they're going to do there. It at least feels different than what some other teams are doing, just taking a quarterback just because that's what you're supposed to do when you don't take one. So we'll see how it plays out. They're going to be bad again this year. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to praise and say that they're going to be 9-7 or anything crazy like that. But I think there's some method to the madness. The big question will be, and we've talked. There's been plenty of talk about this with Philadelphia, with the 76ers in the NBA, with Hinkie. Trust the process. The Browns have a very similar thing going on there. It's just a matter of, one, how long is the process going to go? Two, is there actual light at the end of the tunnel, or is it just going to be, that didn't really work out the way we thought it would?
Yeah, I saw their owner in the orange tie sitting in the middle of the room, and the War Room and Berea, and Paul DePodesta, who I know from his first job with the Baltimore Bandits of the American Hockey League. Yeah. And, I'm sitting there seeing Jimmy Haslam in the middle of the room, and I'm like, I don't think so. I'm not feeling the Browns. But I tell you what else I'm not feeling. I don't like J.J. Watt because I watched Hard Knocks a couple years ago, and I decided I don't like him, and I didn't like the Texans. T.J. Watt's my new favorite dislike guy now. He's drafted by the Steelers, which immediately means I don't like him. How about that?
Yeah, and I will say this. I mean, Pittsburgh needed a pass rusher, and, T.J. Watt at the end of the first round, I think that's a very interesting pick. We'll see how it plays out. There's certainly no one expects him to be as good as his brother, but it's definitely it's a name. It's a name, and it's definitely interesting. And Pittsburgh clearly trying to address a very defined need that they've had, frankly, for quite a while. That Pittsburgh pass rush. Even though James Harrison has been completely fighting off Father Time at a ridiculous level in his late 30s. They need another pass rusher, and we'll see if T.J. Watt is that. But between that and then we mentioned Cincinnati getting the speed with John Ross. Both of their biggest foes in the AFC North, you would think got better, and certainly with the weapons that both those teams have on offense, does help you understand the Marlon Humphrey pick a little bit more in that context.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter, as well as Luke at WNST.net. We're all busy here. I mean, between the Caps and the Wizards and the Orioles up at Yankee Stadium and the draft going on, it is Grand Central around here. If you're on the WNST text service, you'll get all the breaking news first. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Don't forget our morning newspaper ships to your email inbox at 7 a.m. That's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and planetfitness.com. Appreciate everybody out there giving us the love out on social media, the retweets, the likes, the complaints, the more complaints, all of that good stuff's on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook, as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. Don't forget, $100 off. We can only do this until next weekend for any of our trips. That's Green Bay, London, Nashville, Minnesota. They're all on sale. We have the best prices. We have the 18,000 people that have been going with us all these years. It's our fourth time doing a trip to Green Bay. I think this is our eighth Nashville trip through the years. Our first London trip, but not my first London trip. And we haven't been to Minnesota much either. Second Minnesota trip through all these years. We hope you join us. $100 off. Go to the Road Trips tab. Throw me an email, nasty@WNST.net. We'll take good care of you. If you want to hear what Ozzie Newsome has to say or what Marlon Humphrey has to say, you go to the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day, as well as any of our WNST.net programming, including some Caps coverage, some Wizards coverage, certainly some Orioles and some Yankee stuff for the weekend, as the best team in baseball is headed to the Bronx this weekend for 3 with the Pinstripers and then off to Fenway. Whoo! Need a towel. I'll be at Game 2 on Saturday night for the Caps. I will be in Pittsburgh Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and early Thursday, broadcasting from Yins and At in Steel City. And, of course, the Caps lose Game 1, 3-2. I know. It's a familiar refrain. I'm not going to let that get to me because it's 85 degrees outside. I'm Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.